Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When I was around 10 to 11 years old, my mom and I went to this new Whole Foods, which is notorious for attracting Karens, due to the essential oils and healing crystals. Anyways, after my mom and I picked out a few things, we headed to the deli counter, which was a little swamped, seeing as the place had just opened around a week or so. It made sense. But we didn't mind waiting. We had moved up a significant amount in the line when the entitled mother caught my eye. She has a cart full of only 3 things, which I remember vividly: cereal, mostly frosted flakes, 3 cases of Blue Powerade, and some alcohol. I'm pretty sure it was white wine. Could have been something else though. I was confused as around 2 minutes ago my mom was having a conversation with the lady behind us in line. However, these two were obviously not the same person. Me, being 10, thought nothing of it, simply thinking the woman might have gotten out of line because she didn't want to wait that long. By now we were at the front of the line when the entitled mother cuts in front of us. My mom, being somewhat entitled herself, was pretty pissed at this, but that's a story for another day. Anyways, back to the quarrel at hand. The guy who was manning the counter saw this, but didn't say anything. He was a pretty quiet person, let's call him Worker 1. The entitled mother walked up to Worker 1, and Worker 1 attempted to ask her a simple question of, "Hello, how are you? What would you like me to get you?" When he was cut off by the entitled mother. "Give me a sample of the turkey. My kids thought it was dry the last time they had it." The entitled mother said this in a snarky and demanding tone. Worker 1 apologized for the turkey being dry, but oh no, that wasn't enough. She started ranting on how disrespectful it was to serve customers dry turkey, and how he should be ashamed of himself. Worker 1 seemed to be fed up with her at this point, being as he didn't even cook. He just rang people up for whatever they got at the deli section. "Look ma'am, I'm sorry the turkey was dry, but do you want a sample or not?" The entitled mother shot him a stone-cold glare, then nodded afterwards. Worker 1 gave her a piece of turkey, only for her to complain that it was dry again. "Is that turkey old? Give me a fresher piece," she complained. The worker was completely done with her, but suddenly a smug grin spread across his face. "I'll go check the back, ma'am." He came back with a discolored-looking piece of turkey, but nonetheless, she gobbled it right up. There was a minute of silence before she grew visibly pale and looked queasy. She made a beeline for the bathroom. My mom chuckled a bit. I guess she had figured it out before me because of how young I was. We got our stuff and we left. While my mom and I were laughing about how crazy the entitled mother was, we dumped her the dry turkey lady. For closure, Worker 1 had gone to the back and managed to fish out some old turkey from when they had first opened the store a week ago. He then gave it to the entitled mother, which made her pretty sick. I guess what they say is true about how justice is best served cold. So, I'm a medieval enthusiast and like going to festivals in my armor and weapons. There are always a lot of families and kids at these festivals, running around the castle and having fun. Sometimes the family will ask if their child could have a picture with me, and usually I let them because I did so too when I was younger. So this happened last year. I was at a festival and a family asked for a picture. German wasn't their first language, so communication was odd, but I got to the kid and gave him my sword. It was blunt for legal reasons. For the picture. They take the picture and start walking away without giving me my sword back. I tell them to stop and gently take my sword back from the kid, and he wasn't too happy about it. At this point, the mom starts yelling at me why I'm stealing her son's sword and insulting me in some language from the Balkans, I think. I decide to ignore her and walk away. She runs after me and punches me in the back of the helmet and hurts her hand. Punching a metal plate made to withstand axes isn't the best idea. Now she said I stole the sword and assaulted her and should give it back. Soon, security showed up and luckily enough, Some bystanders explain everything, and she was escorted off the castle grounds. I am sorry for the kid. He would have had a pretty good day if his mom wasn't such a witch. This story came to me from an old co-worker. It's happened around 8 years ago and just blew my mind at the time. My co-worker, we will call him Teddy, was an older gentleman who lived in one of the nicer but still not nice parts of the city. A bunch of duplex homes and row homes in a big grid. Late one night around 1 a.m. there is a hellacious screech. Crashing, sounds of breaking glass, more screeching and crashing. By the time Teddy gets out of bed and into a coat, there is only the sound of car alarms and blinking lights continuing down the block, starting with his own car out front of his house. Following the damage, there is a line of debris and honking cars, ending up at the twisted wreck of a motorcycle, and a rider is prone and motionless in the street. Teddy calls 911 and sometime later the police and paramedics arrive. Motorcycle driver was later pronounced dead on arrival. And the police say he must have been going close to 100 when he hit Teddy's car. Somehow barely held onto the bike as it continued down the road and hit several other vehicles. And finally he hit a panel truck dead on, and that's likely what killed him. The biker wasn't wearing a helmet or pads, in fact was wearing boxers and t-shirt and nothing else, not even shoes. When Teddy got a police report later, it turns out there were amphetamines in his system, which I suppose explains a lot. So Teddy's already not in the greatest shape since this is going to raise his insurance rates, despite it not being at all his fault. But the real kicker came a few weeks later. Teddy got a letter in the mail which essentially threatened that he would be sued if he didn't pay $50,000 to the mother of the deceased biker. And this is how I heard about this issue and I saw the demand letter. It was clearly not written by a real lawyer, but just to make sure, I checked the address, which was an apartment building in the city, and the State Bar website did not have any records of any lawyer of that name. The case was utterly preposterous as well. Apparently, Teddy had negligently parked his car in the street, which made him at fault for this kid's drug-addled joyride sudden stop. It went on for about 3 pages, mostly bad legalese and threats that if he didn't pay, they would sue for millions. I told Teddy to call his insurance company and forward them the letter. The biker hit his car, so this would be owed to liability whether he was driving it or not. Plus 99% sure that this letter was essentially fraud. A month goes by with no response from the biker's mom, so Teddy is thinking it's all over, right? Nope. One day, out of the blue, the mom shows up at his house. During the day when Teddy isn't home. This is third hand from his wife, but apparently it went from "how could you be so heartless, give me money" to "this is all your fault" to a shrieking "you murdered my son" in a very short time. Teddy's wife was a Filipina, coolest lady you're likely to meet, amazing cook, tough as nails and always in charge, and took precisely zero nonsense from anyone. Being a social worker, she knew exactly how to handle unreasonable people. She closed and locked the door, called the police, and then called Teddy at work. You could hear this woman ranting, even through a closed door, over a cell phone that wasn't even in speakerphone mode, and through another cell phone not on speaker. Cops arrived and the woman was arrested for terroristic threats, disturbing the peace, and trespassing. Teddy and his wife got a protective order, and that thankfully was the last they heard from this woman. Teddy's car had some major scratches and dents along the driver's side and a cracked tailgate. Other cars were similar, and the panel truck had a massive dent in the rear door. Insurance paid for it, and I assume they either went after the kid's insurance or his estate, which was probably the value of the motorcycle at best, drugs and all. But we never heard anything about the legal threats after he sent them to his car insurance company. My crazy story begins with me lying in a hospital bed feeling like a human piñata after a gnarly accident, when a wild Karen enters the scene. Let me take you through the roller coaster of events that unfolded before my eyes. But before we delve into the chaos, let's get to know a bit about me. Let's get to know me a bit better. I'm Alex, a regular guy who loves living life to the fullest. Whether I'm exploring the great outdoors or trying out the latest food trends, I'm always up for an adventure. Unfortunately, this particular adventure landed me in the hospital, and that's where our story begins. Okay, let's dive right into the action. There I was, lying in my hospital bed, connected to various beeping machines and wearing an oxygen mask. I'll spare you the gory details, but let's just say my body had seen better days. The room was quiet except for the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. Suddenly, the door burst open and in walked Karen, the mad dog. You know the type, hair that could rival a bird's nest. She stormed towards my bed, her eyes locked on me like a predator stalking its prey. "Excuse me, what are you doing in my bed? Get out!" she shrieked. I blinked in disbelief, unsure of how to respond. I managed to stammer, "I'm sorry, but this is my bed. The doctor assigned it to me because, well, I'm in pretty bad shape." Karen scoffed as if my injuries were a mere inconvenience to her grand plans. "I don't care about your injuries. I demand to be treated first. I have things to do and places to be." I couldn't believe the audacity of this woman. I mustered up the courage to defend myself even in my weakened state. "Look, I understand you're in a hurry, but the doctor has prioritized my treatment because I'm in critical condition." Apparently, reason wasn't in Karen's vocabulary. In one swift motion, she reached over and snatched my oxygen mask off my face, leaving me gasping for air. It felt like I had been punched in the gut by a heavyweight boxer. "Hey, what are you doing? That's essential for me right now." I struggled to breathe without the mask. Karen gave me a wicked grin as if she relished my suffering. "You don't need it as much as I do. Now get out of my way." I watched as Karen began to push me off the bed, determined to take my place. Panic set in as I realized that my injuries made it difficult for me to defend myself. But just as I was about to hit the floor, a voice of reason cut through the chaos. "Excuse me, what on earth do you think you're doing?" It was Dr. Johnson, my savior in this banana world I'm living in. Karen froze, not believing that someone would dare to question her actions. "I demand to be treated first. It is my turn, and this man can wait." Dr. Johnson stepped forward. "Ma'am, this man is in critical condition and requires immediate attention. Your case is not as urgent. I suggest you wait your turn like everyone else." At this point, Karen was practically about to burst from anger. And yeah, surely the story doesn't end there. The hospital staff, alerted by the commotion, rushed to my aid. They helped me back onto the bed and swiftly called security to handle the situation. As Karen continued to argue and protest her treatment, the security guards arrived and tried to handcuff her. "You are under arrest for assaulting a patient and causing a disturbance," one of the guards announced. The look on Karen's face was priceless, but boy, she wasn't going to go down without a fight. As the security guards approached her, her eyes widened and she planted her feet firmly on the ground, refusing to budge an inch. It was as if she believed she could single-handedly take on the entire hospital staff. "I will not be treated like a criminal. I demand to speak to your supervisor," she yelled at. The guards exchanged looks, unfazed by Karen's desperate plea. They had dealt with their fair share of entitled individuals and were prepared for the show that was about to unfold. With a gentle yet assertive touch, they reached out to handcuff her, expecting her to comply. But Karen simply transformed into a raging whirlwind of chaos, flailing her arms and kicking her legs in a desperate attempt to free herself from their grasp. She knocked over chairs, sending them clattering to the floor, and grabbed onto anything within reach, creating a mess wherever she went. The hospital staff, stunned by the madness they are witnessing, stepped back, giving the guards some space to handle the situation. Nurses hurriedly gathered patients and bystanders out of harm's way. "Ma'am, please cooperate. We are just doing our job," one of the guards pleaded, trying to reason with Karen. But treason was a foreign concept to her at this point. With a guttural roar, Karen swiped at the guard, narrowly missing his face. It was clear that she was determined to make her exit as dramatic as possible. Consequences be damned. Realizing that reasoning with Karen was futile, the guards swiftly adjusted their tactics. They called for backup, and soon more security personnel arrived on the scene. Together, they formed a human barrier around Karen, ensuring she couldn't harm herself or anyone else. As the chaos escalated, the guards employed a combination of verbal commands and physical restraint techniques to subdue Karen without causing her any harm. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Karen's struggle subsided and she slumped in defeat. The guards wasted no time in securely handcuffing her, ensuring that she couldn't cause any further chaos. With Karen finally under control, security personnel began the arduous task of escorting her out of the hospital. I heard them as they made their way through the hospital corridors, and Karen continued to make a scene, shouting expletives and hurling insults at anyone within earshot. I was later told that after the security team reached the hospital's main entrance, a police car was just arriving to take Karen into custody. With Karen safely secured inside the vehicle, the doors closed and the police car slowly disappeared into the distance. The hospital returned to its usual state of peace. A few days after my release from the hospital, as I was finally beginning to regain, I received an unexpected call. It was from the local police department. He explained that they had received reports of the altercation with Karen and wanted to follow up on the matter. The officer expressed concern for my well-being and asked if I would be willing to press charges against Karen for assault. While I wasn't one to harbor resentment or seek revenge, I realized that taking legal action was necessary in this case. So I took a deep breath and replied, "Officer, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your concern. Yes, I would like to press charges against Karen for assault." Officer understood my stance and assured me that they would proceed with the necessary legal steps. He explained that they would gather statements from witnesses, review security camera footage, and build a strong case against Karen. The evidence against her was substantial, bolstered by witness testimonies and the hospital security footage. In the end, Karen was found guilty on multiple charges and sentenced accordingly. The judge, taking into account the evidence presented, the testimonies of the witnesses, and the consequences of Karen's actions, ruled that she would serve a sentence of 6 months in jail. Additionally, she was ordered to attend mandatory anger management classes. As for me, well, I've made a full recovery and returned to my adventurous lifestyle. I've even added a new item to my survival kit, a special Karen repellent. Just kidding. But hey, you never know when you might encounter one of these entitled creatures in the wild, right? I was working at the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Speculator, or Epic as it was known to the cast members. And we had already closed the theater for the start of a show. When the theater gets to maxed capacity, we legally can't put more people in there because of fire code and so on. This woman barrels up to me, gets in my face, and waves her paper fast pass ticket in my face. She demanded to be allowed into the show, and screams that her child, a little boy no more than 6 years old, needs to see the show, or his day is ruined. She was screaming so loud veins were popping out of the front of her head. I stood there calm and collected, explaining to her that the theater is full. We can't let anyone else in. She pushes past me with one arm, holding her child's arm in the other. She marches straight for the ropes that block the entrance and tries to hoist her son over the rope. Before she gets that far, a manager walks up and puts his hand in the air to try to contain the situation. He offers to get the kid an ice cream and provide VIP seats to the next show. If she calms down and, well, comes back later. After screaming about how rude I was to her, which I was not, she accepts the token of kindness. My manager turns to me and asks me how long my shift is today. I told him I was off work at 6:30. He nods and tells the irate woman that he will have me personally escort her to the VIP section down front. He writes her a ticket voucher for the ice cream and seats, and she fumed off with not even a thank you. My manager turns to me and apologizes on behalf of her. Then he asks me, how many more shows do we have today? I looked at the clock and realized it was after 5 p.m., well in the middle of our last show of the day. I looked at my manager as a sly smile crept across his face. He had just given an entitled parent a VIP pass to a show that won't happen. The respect I already had for him just skyrocketed through the roof. I was long gone by the time she came back, but I would love to imagine the look on her face when she came back at 7 for the last show. Kid got ice cream and Mom got mad. It was a win-win. Just thought I'd share the story with y'all. Maybe it will give some of you hope. I bought a house in a then small town called Round Rock in Texas back in 2007. Now for a little background context, I was born and raised in the central Texas hill country, and throughout my entire childhood, there have been never any homeowners associations. Some of the rich neighborhoods had neighborhood associations which are far different than a homeowners association. I went off to join the military in 2001, and when I came back 2006, homeowners associations were everywhere. Even the neighborhood where I grew up now has a homeowners association. My parents had moved to a new neighborhood, and my father had been constantly fighting with his homeowners association. Things like he built a tool shed in his own backyard without permission, and he parked his car in his driveway instead of his garage. That kind of stuff. So I'm seeing his constant struggle and being raised in a culture where your property was your property and no one else's business. I wanted no part of his homeowners association stuff. Anyway, it's now 2007 and I'm home from the military and looking to buy a house. My number one priority is no homeowners associations. After a couple of months, I found a home in a neighborhood without an HOA. It surprised me because it was a fairly new neighborhood and it was also a relatively small neighborhood. It definitely looked like it would have an HOA, but it didn't. I move in, love the place, and proceed to go about my life. One day I am talking to my neighbor about homeowners associations. I mentioned how one of the main reasons I bought that house was because it had no HOA. My neighbor, who just so happened to be one of the first people to move to the neighborhood, tells me, "Oh yeah, we had one of those when they first started building this place." I was surprised and asked him what happened to it. And here's a good part finally. He says, "Well, back when there were still only about 20 or so homes built, there were two people who lived in a neighborhood that ran the homeowners association. Well, they were just awful people, and they were constantly harassing the other neighbors about grass being too high and trash cans being visible and silly stuff like that. So some of the other neighbors and I looked up the homeowners association bylaws and realized we could hold an election to replace the homeowners association council. And that's what we did. I became president of the HOA and a couple other neighbors were council members. Once we were in charge, we just voted to dissolve the homeowners association. So now we don't have one." About 15 years ago, I was in high school and started working at a new subway in my town. This was right when the decor changed from an NYC subway map to the vegetables and stuff all over the walls. The owners were very adamant that we only got paid for our schedule and not for the actual time we worked. I didn't think much of it because I never really had a job before. It was after my first few shifts that I realized this was nonsense. I'd get paid for working 5 to 8, but I'd have to stay until almost 9 because the dinner rush was rough and prep needed to get done. After a few pay periods, we high school employees raised the question with the owners and told them our time slips didn't match our paychecks. They said we knew that we only got paid for our schedule and not total hours worked. At the time, a buddy was dating a girl whose mom worked for the state DOL. He brought up the issue with his girlfriend's mom and got an investigation started. The problem with the state labor department is that investigations were announced ahead of time. They were notified that the state was interested in pay discrepancies and were going to review payroll and compare it to the time clock records. But those gears ground slowly. Before the hammer fell, we had a new policy quickly implemented that said we were only allowed to work the hours we were scheduled and not a minute more. Cool. Glad that's in writing. Things went okay for a few weeks with only occasional managerial grumblings about having to work more now that we lifted our time on a dot. Then our city hosted a travel baseball tournament at a park about a mile from our store. You can probably see where this is going. We get bus loads of people in our little shopping complex, and a line out of the door when my shift ends at 1. Deuces, guys. The manager/owner's son in his office watching The Matrix when I go and clock out. He gets all angry about the line and says I have to stay and help. I asked if I'll get paid for the extra time, and he said, "You only get paid for your scheduled time," and trailed off. He knew he was screwed. He didn't have the ability to authorize more payroll expenses without also calling his management into question. Sorry. As I'm walking out the front, we weren't allowed to park in the back near the door. We had to park in Jim Paul parking and walk out the front door. He started following me out and shouting in front of customers. He fired me on the spot and demanded I give back my Subway shirts. No, you took $15 per shirt out of my first paycheck. They are mine. He followed me out into the parking lot, cussing me out in English and Spanish until I drove off. The line was still there when I pulled out. I found out later that afternoon that 2 other people quit after their shifts ended because the job was bad. The pay was bad and the nonsense there was boundless. The absentee owners eventually called each of us and asked us to come back. One of us did. I didn't. My other friend didn't either. I actually got a job at a different Subway that was a piece of cake compared to the job I got fired from. All of the employees eventually got their back pay after the Labor Department investigation dust settled. They settled with the state to pay everyone 300% of their missing wages and had to pay for annual audits for 5 years to ensure they weren't breaking the law again. It got so bad that Subway's parent company, Doctors Associates, sent a team down to slap the owners into compliance with state and federal labor laws. All this because they didn't want to pay us our minimum wage for the extra half hour or so per day. Hey Reddit, not 100% sure this counts, but I want to share my story. I used to work in a grocery store back in 2016. I was 16 or 17 at the time. I don't work retail anymore, but I wanted to share the story I still remember to this day. It was a pretty normal night right before the end of my shift. I was one of the few closers at my store. So it was just me, my supervisor, and a cashier. I worked the self-checkout/customer service desk. My supervisor had just collected the tills and was in the back counting. And I was starting my rounds to take back the non-perishables that were left at the registers. I also might add that our store had terrible camera placement. Basically, it showed all the registers and the supervisor's office door, which were the safe was. This is important later. After putting up all the items that were left at the registers, I did my final checks of the store to make sure there were no misplaced and damaged item on the floor. I find a case of beer that was leaking in our beer/wine section, and since I wasn't sure how damaged the bottom of the cardboard case was, I had to drag it to the front so I could inform my supervisor about the damaged item before taking it to the back. We kept a cart full of damaged items to be taken out by the morning crew. Since the supervisor's office is locked while they are counting the tills, I call over to her and let her know that there was a damaged case of beer and I was taking it to the back. She responds with an absent, "Okay, sounds good." So I take it to the back place with the rest of the damaged items and go back to the front to see if there is anything else my supervisor needs me to do before I clock out. There isn't. Next couple days are fine as I finish up the week and wait for the next week's schedule to be posted. And I find out that I am not scheduled for the next week. I figured there must have been a mistake, as there was someone working at the same grocery store who shared my first name. I go upstairs to my manager's office and ask him about the schedule and why I wasn't scheduled. He responds with, "Oh, my bad. I forgot to tell you that you are suspended until the investigation is over. By the way, can you train your replacement today on the self-checkout/customer service desk?" Me, confused and annoyed at the moment, didn't really pay attention to the second part of his comment, and I asked him what he was talking about. We caught you stealing that case of beer that you took to the back, and until the police investigation is complete, you won't be working here anymore. Please turn in your uniform, name tag, and badge. I am furious, but I decided that I would just go with a bit of malicious compliance in this situation. Well, boss man, I took the damaged case of beer to the back to be thrown out the morning as per procedure. But since I won't be working here anymore, I guess you'll just have to find someone else to train my replacement, since I clearly can't be trusted. I was the only person who could train someone for the customer service desk other than him, and his jaw dropped. The look on his face was priceless, as I took off my uniform and handed him my name tag and override card. I then proceeded to walk out, get in my car, and drive home. About 2 years later, I joined the army, and I'm going for a job that requires a security clearance. Guess what shows up? That suspension was an unfinished police report and the tapes from the security camera. I sat there with my interviewer as we watched the tape together, clearly showing that I did not steal anything. Needless to say, I was approved for my clearance. I asked if I can get a copy of the tape, and my interviewer agrees. It took 2 years, but I finally had the evidence I needed to sue for wrongful termination. But as the time is well over the statute of limitation, I am unable to actually do anything about it. Either way, I decided to go pay my old workplace a visit over my Christmas block leave. And a couple people recognize me, including my old boss. He tells me that thieves like me aren't welcome in his store and that I need to leave or he would be calling the police. I told him to call them and that his claim would surely hold up when I showed them the copy of the video footage of me stealing. The store had one of my favorite muffins, and honestly, I really wanted one since they are only made there. The police got cold and did nothing, and I got 3 muffins free of charge thanks to my favorite supervisor. Absolutely worth it.